Welcome back to another episode of our podcast. Today we have a very important and special topic to talk about: cybersecurity. What is it? Why is it so important? Today I'm joined by two experts in the industry. I'm joined by Sanjay Parikh, the cybersecurity expert, and George Thorson, the specialty finance expert. Sanjay, please introduce yourself. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your background.
I appreciate it, Nolan. I'm excited to be here to talk about cybersecurity. Hopefully, I should be excited since I'm in this field. But my name is Sanjay Parikh. I'm currently the Vice President of Professional Services for CyberOne. CyberOne is one of the larger security solution providers in the TOLA region: Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas. We provide value-added reseller services, which is basically implementation, identification of the right solution for you when it comes to security. And we also provide professional services, penetration testing, which is kind of like what you hear about hacking, things like that, cloud implementation, configuration, migration, advisory services, so vCISO, which is Virtual Chief Information Security Officer, and then networking and identity services as well. My background really comes from years of application development, networking, former Chief Information Security Officer for some large corporations, and then a lot of consulting from all the way from mom and pop stores, 1-2-man operations, all the way up to Fortune 10 companies.
Wow.
So,
well, thank you for that introduction, Sanjay. I'm really excited to have you on and share your experience and your knowledge with all of our viewers and listeners. George, I'd love to, a lot of our audience might be familiar with your background, but please share.
I'm George Thorson. I've been around in this industry of lending or factoring small and medium-sized businesses for over 40 years. And I'm currently EVP and Chief Credit Officer over at Triumph, which is probably the second largest transportation factor. And we have Triumph Pay, which is the largest payment network. So cybersecurity is absolutely critical to us, and so I look forward to. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Really excited to share how you can tell your real life experience, your real life knowledge on how this impacts, you, your company, and your clients as well. Kind of kicking it off to Sanjay, our cybersecurity expert. What are some of the unique challenges that this space and specialty finance is experiencing that you're seeing firsthand?
well, specialty finance companies are not necessarily different than any other companies, right? They all face the same sort of challenges that are out there, right? And we have so many different threats that are out there, and they're ever evolving as the landscape grows. I mean, if you think about it, we came from computers, workstations, all of a sudden they were starting to be combined to local area networks, and then communicating across the world. Now we have cloud, we have OT devices, your TVs, and things like that, even refrigerators. Now we have IoT devices, and starting to get into artificial intelligence. So the landscape just grows as far as the different types of threats and challenges that people have to kind of mitigate and look against. And so lots of possibilities. Along with that, you have the specialty finance industry regulations. It's a ever-growing market. I think 20 trillion last time I looked. So it's a very popular place for cyber criminals to look at.
Yes, and it's continually growing. I think, George, you probably see that firsthand, the increase in these cybersecurity criminals, sort of what Sanjay touched on, the changing environment. How have you seen that impact in your day-to-day with Triumph?
So let me set the stage here for just a minute. Specialty finance, whether it's ABL, but we're mainly going to talk about factoring today, is at least a three-party, if not a four-party arrangement.
Right.
A normal B2B may have a seller and a buyer, of goods, and they have their transactions, they have their communications, they move money, et cetera. When you get into specialty finance, you typically have multiple parties. There is still the seller, still the buyer, but there's also the funder who is maybe going to fund the transaction or is going to collect funds from from the seller at the same time. So as you start to add more parties to the equation, it gets more complicated. In transportation, you may have a shipper, a freight broker, a carrier, and a factor. So you actually have 4 parties that are involved in the exchange of information and funds.
So go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, just listening to George and the different 3-party, 4 parties, and the different types of information that George is talking about with the funds and the transactions, already you identify, name, people, potentially bank account information, credit card information, lots of different sensitive information that goes there, and that, cyber criminals are after, right? So they could produce identity theft or, a basically public loss of trust within your company.
Yep.
Not only are criminals necessarily after potentially your data, but just the fact that you can have access to that data. Because if they come in, what people forget, especially small companies, if they can come in and provide or put ransomware on your computers, not let you have access to any of your ability to do business, that kind of stops your business. And then you have the
absolutely.
And if you don't have the ability to restore or recover from there, then you have a choice of either paying the individuals or running out of business if you can't recover. And that's a concern. But even with all that doom and gloom that I kind of talk about, it's kind of interesting because over probably 50% of companies don't even have the basic security pieces or technologies in their organization. When we talk about understanding what their vulnerabilities are so that they can patch and remediate, making sure that they have the proper endpoint protection, making sure that they have strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, when you log into your bank account and then they send you back a text saying,
I learned the importance of that one firsthand.
all that.
Yeah.
Right. So some of these basic pieces that companies have to sit there and implement, cyber criminals are taking advantage of. And so it's a real challenge because corporations, even though it's real easy, it seems like it's pretty basic and corporations should just implement this. But corporations need to understand the cost of these technologies. They need to understand how there are different methods of revenue generation. So does it affect them? Is there a risk? Can they recover from these pieces? And it's not just purchasing the technology and implementing. It's understanding how it fits within the organization. So if they don't have a person thinking about this in business terms, or at least discussing that with the executives, they're not going to be able to move their security program forward because people are going to think it's just basically a black hole of cost.
Right. So you had mentioned a few different ways that cybersecurity criminals try to infiltrate systems. What would you say is the most common that you come across? Is it, phishing emails? Is it, installing a software on one's computer, that they gained access to one way or another? What do you see most often? What's the biggest target?
Well, biggest target from an ease standpoint is probably phishing and malware, right? You're always going to get the emails, and then the emails are going to do one of two things. It's either going to drop a payload, which is malware, onto your machine, either through a file, or now they have fileless just by you opening up the email, or they're going to sit there and put you into a web screen that looks like what you log into normally, and then you're going to sit there and input your credentials, ID, password, items like that to give them access to whatever that data is, whether it be your bank account information or whether it be access to the organization that they're asking for. So that's the most common pieces.
Right.
But there are a lot of different ways that they'll come at you from that perspective. And you just have to understand and be vigilant.
Absolutely. So kind of passing it off to you, George, being in the industry, you've seen these attempts and these attacks multiple times. What do you do to try to stay ahead? What's your course of action?
Well, we have a whole team, and we're constantly trying to stay ahead. Some of the things I didn't realize right off the bat was that the the crook, I'll call it, criminal, can get inside and they'll stay there quietly for 3-4 months. I never knew that before until we saw it happen to a company that we acquired. And so this particular, it got in probably through malware or somehow, but watched what was happening. One particular person for 3 months. It happened to be the collections manager. So it had a lot of communications with outside third parties on when is the payment going to come in and how much is the payment. When this person went on vacation, they stepped forward and took over sending emails under his name directly to the payors and managed to divert $700,000 of payments that were on their way while he was on vacation. And thankfully, it was just with a communication that says we're changing where you send the money. Please send it to this bank instead.
Right.
We managed to catch the second transmission because the part, someone said,
this doesn't seem right.
It doesn't seem right, and communicated to us, and so we caught like $300,000 in the, the party's bank account, but the other $400,000 was gone. It already transferred overseas. So it was really a surprise to me that they laid in wait and studied for 3 or 4 months what the vulnerabilities were, what the signatures looked like, what the protocol and procedures were that were involved around the transfer of money.
Right.
And that really, surprised me. Now, there's a multi-faceted way to approach this thing. I mean, we're obviously know that there's barbarians at the gate.
Right.
They're either ransomware or they're looking for just information. And then there's also the ones that are definitely wanting to get involved in the movement of money situation and divert it.
So from that experience, because obviously that, $400,000, that's not just pocket change. What is something that you saw take effect, or how did you change your operation to prevent that?
Well, we've had to develop a lot of different procedures. And the reality is that our clients get hacked an awful lot. And so it is in a week or in a month, we will have, a client fake saying, we changed our remittance address, please send the money here. So we've had to devise a variety of techniques, and we're constantly trying to find a new way to verify that we're actually communicating with the client and that person is authorized to actually change a bank account. 80% of the time, that's not. They're trying to just get the money.
I mean, with the uptick in the cybersecurity criminals, I've heard of groups and organizations that, hey, send me a picture or FaceTime me. In today's world, it's so easy to hop on a video call just to try to add another step. So, Sanjay, with touching, as George mentioned, you have, the borrower, you might have the freight broker, the carrier, the factoring company. With it touching all those hands, I know you can secure your organization. You can put those measures in place. What advice do you give to your clients or to other individuals that are associated with that transaction?
Well, you have to understand your supply chain and what they have, but as long as you have your ducks in a row, so to speak, or your controls in place, I think that's the main thing. But you have to kind of watch out. I mean, George talked about that somebody lay in hiding for a long time, right? So how do you do that? We talked a little bit, or I mentioned a little bit about endpoint protection, right? So servers and workstations are really where the data is housed, and that's where people want to get to. And so if you put this endpoint protection, that will generate alerts more about when people access information. Alerts that say either good or bad, right? And then depending upon what that behavior is you can monitor what's going on and see. But if you're not, originally, most people were monitoring only critical alerts because those were the ones considered the bad ones. But like what George said, if somebody got into, let's say, on a low or a medium alert and then just kind of waited there because nobody was watching that. So, hen house, so to speak, right? We saw that in Target back in 2012, that somebody did the same thing from that perspective. They lay in wait, and then they took advantage at the appropriate time. Now they sit there and they lay in wait, and that's something that potentially could have happened in that Hong Kong incident that happened about 2 months ago, where somebody generated a Zoom call with a financial analyst, right? And then injected artificial intelligence into it. So they set up a Zoom call. They had all the people on his finance team with the right sort of faces on there.
Crazy.
All deep faked all the voices, and basically instructed him to wire $25 million to this new bank account. And he did, and was captured the wire fraud.
Yeah,
basically.
a pretty costly mistake. So what's some so if you were brought on to help tighten up their security measures, let's use that example as, what would you have done different, or what would you have coached the team on to prevent something like that from happening?
Well, those are not necessarily, those happen because of cybersecurity pieces, but you would have put more business processes in place for validation, right? You're not just going to take the word of somebody, especially on a Zoom call, and wire money. You're going to have secondary challenges to that, and to validate whether it's through another person looking at it, or validating, or putting in dual key, similar to when people, from a government standpoint, implement some sort of process, right? But you have to look at all different sorts of protection when you come to cybersecurity within your environment or organization, right? You have to look at how do you protect against malware, right? Because you have that phishing email that comes through. You have to look at how do you generate alerts to understand what's happening on your network. So we talk about endpoint protection. If you're going to have those alerts, then it doesn't really do you any good unless somebody's looking at those alerts, right? So you have to have some sort of security operations center, internal or external. I always recommend external, because that's somebody that's going to be vigilant when they look at your alerts, and not necessarily just pass it off and get tired and just kind of do the checkbox. So there are certain things you can put in that would help reduce that risk,
right,
so to speak.
Absolutely. So George, I know Triumph's a large organization. Do you currently have any remote staff?
We do, yeah.
So how and that's a common theme that we're hearing. Sanjay, would I be correct to assume that increases the risk when you have a lot of staff that is no longer on site? They might be using personal devices, or even company computers, but just they might be working out of a coffee shop or on the weekend.
Absolutely.
So what's something that what advice would you give to organizations that do have a pretty large remote workforce?
Making sure that the connections that are coming in are secure, making sure that they have the right technologies on the computer, making sure that, like I said, about endpoint protection and items like that, and then you're monitoring what's happening and what they're doing, making sure you have unique IDs so that there's no shared accounts, making sure your passwords are strong. A lot of the times people are still using 8-character passwords. If they're, I always recommend that you're using up to 12. Even though users are going to still use, it's hard to get them off of those dictionary words and things like that. But if they use better passwords, it's harder to generate enough entropy from these computers to guess that password. We can talk at a later date about how often you should change it, but at least if they have a strong password, that will help a lot of the pieces. But even outside of that, right? There's a ton of vulnerabilities. What's called 0 days. That's when a vulnerability has been found, and then also communicated to the public. Hey, we have this vulnerability, but we don't have a patch yet. Well, then what do you do, and how do you fix that, or how do you make sure that you're watching? The only way really is to monitor what's going on into your network and wait for that patch to come out so you can patch it immediately.
Right.
But if you don't have a patching process, or you're not really good at addressing your vulnerabilities, or you don't know about if you're not monitoring what's going on in the industry, so you receive those sort of notifications, well, you're already being reactive as opposed to being proactive.
Right. George, what would you say you're seeing most often in terms of cybersecurity criminals trying to target Triumph or your organization in any form?
Well, I don't know if I would talk about Triumph per se, but everything's about identity right now. We're very heavy in the transportation space,
right,
and that's all about identity fraud. So, I mean, there were $300 million worth of cargo theft just in the last year, all created by identity theft and false identity, and they're very, very strong. So the question is, all of the protocols that existed for a truck to pick up a load of goods and who sent it and who's driving it and all of these things they found a wealth of opportunity to commit fraud and to commit cargo theft by simply taking the identity of the trucking company, taking the identity of the third-party logistics freight broker, and stealing that identity. It's really a big problem right now, and so we're seeing it all the time.
How are you identifying that, and what measures do you have in place to prevent it?
We have a couple of companies that we are working with that are very heavily involved in identifying and using the best data that we can to identify trailer numbers, to identify truck numbers, to do GPS tracking, to do a variety of things like that. You've got to get multiple parties to cooperate in that kind of situation. So it's not just us. We're sitting back and we feel like we're protected, but we see the other parties that don't follow the same.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Triumph is such a big company and takes its security very seriously.
Right.
They're dealing with some small mom and pop shops and potentially not really educated a lot in cybersecurity. And so, the ability to attack them, the supply chain, and then get into Triumph is a very big concern for Triumph.
Absolutely. You kind of touched on something that I wanted to expand on. Earlier, when you were speaking, you said, there's organizations that don't have any cybersecurity measures in place. Do you think that is just based off, a lack of education, or just thinking, oh, it'll never happen to me? When you were brought on to consult or to look at an organization that might not have anything in place currently, what is their biggest why or reason behind that?
A lot of that is, I think that they have knowledge that cybersecurity is important.
Right.
Security is important. What they don't necessarily understand is how the different threats, the landscape, all the different points of attack, the different vectors, so to speak. And nowadays, with the economy the way it is, people are running very lean. So people wear multiple hats, different priorities, what's important, right? And cost or operational cost is not important. What's important is generating revenue. And so having those resources, basically being responsible for those areas is very hard sometimes, and you forget about what needs to happen because those processes need to be consistent. And all of a sudden, one day you go, oh, I can skip that for today. And then one day becomes 2 days, and then 2 days becomes 3 days, and because it's not consistent. And that's usually what happens, right? So if you sit there and say, okay, because we all know about, let's say, Patch Tuesday that comes out every month from Microsoft, and then people forget about, I have other priorities I can't patch right now. And all of a sudden you go 1 month or 2 months, and then and you leave yourself open for those types of things. So I think that's really what happens for most organizations. When you come to mom and pop, that's usually the education, or they don't know the different technologies because they're not the experts. Even with the experts, there's a shortage of cybersecurity skills out there. So to get the right person with the right knowledge to help you is very hard.
Right. And I guess kind of to walk away with some takeaways George, what is some advice that you would give our listeners that, are in the industry, they're experiencing what you're experiencing, you have firsthand experience of it. So what is some takeaways or some key points that you would share with them?
Number one, get insurance.
Okay.
And I'll mention that because I'm working with a party right now, they're a freight broker, that had a ransomware attack, and they wanted $1 million, and they said no. And the ransomware people got into their redundant source and got into that as well by working with the data. They closed the redundancy, so they were really out of luck. We had a lot of their data, and they were trying to rebuild from that. But the only thing they had was some sort of rider on their general corporate liability policy that, I don't know, gave them $10,000 or something like that. And it was really insufficient. So you need to investigate insurance, number one. I know that's kind of not really why we're here, but I got to mention.
I love that.
No, it's a good caveat.
You've got to have it.
Absolutely.
It is something that, I recently had a conversation, being in our position, that's, when we are speaking with prospects or clients, we want to make sure that they're protected as well. And that got brought up, and it was, well, do I need it? So I'm glad you mentioned that, because you're able to show firsthand how important it is. What else would you?
So many parties in specialty finance cannot afford to build a cybersecurity team and get the kind of expertise. Right. So you got to go to an outside firm like that Sanjay is with, and you really have to pay attention, because it's certainly not going to stop. Okay, the idea that well, it's over. It's never going to stop. They're always going to be a leapfrog ahead, and so if you're not up to date always with somebody who's an expert in that area, that's what you have to do.
Yep, absolutely.
No, you're very right. Right, cyber criminals are not going away. I think last report that I saw, there was over 3,800 breaches just last year, right? So it's a lot of breaches that are out there. Cyber insurance is a good call from George out there. Some of the things that you can do that are just minimal cost, stronger passwords. It doesn't take much to implement a stronger password philosophy from that standpoint.
You mentioned the dictionary words, so can you expand a little bit on that, what you mean by staying away from the dictionary words?
Well, a lot of people will use their passwords as password, or something simple that you can find in the dictionary, right, as opposed to basically a jumble of the letters.
And numbers and special characters.
Because these cyber criminals basically go through the dictionary first when they're trying to guess your password from that standpoint.
Right.
Other things that you can do that would be probably minimal cost, train your users on helping to educate them on phishing emails and what they should see, or if they're trying to change the bank account or the remittance advice.
We run tests on all 400 something employees every month, trying to trick them to see if they'll open an attachment when they shouldn't,
Right.
Yeah.
And so our cyber folks are doing that all the time. I got caught on one. And it's like I looked and I'd managed to catch about 10 in a row, and then I missed one.
Yeah, the cybersecurity tests are getting better too.
I know. I was just sort of busy,
Absolutely.
and it was from somebody, and I.
Yeah, I mean, with artificial intelligence, it's going to get even trickier
Tougher.
from that standpoint. And I'm not even talking about some of the the leading edge or the costly pieces like automation with artificial intelligence and things like that, potentially endpoint protection and monitoring of the alerts. I'm just talking about the basics, right? And so you should have the multi-factor authentication, absolutely, because if you assume that you're going to have a couple of people that will click on those emails, at least you can have additional protection for that. They may guess that password or get that password, but they won't have the ability, or they won't have that device that has that secondary response, right? And so you can reduce the risk that way. Make sure that your recovery efforts are there. In other words, your backups and the ability to recover. I think those are some of the basics that you can do to make sure that you are still alive. And then you can develop a strategy. I absolutely believe what George is saying is that you have to partner with a cybersecurity firm, such as ours. I would like it to be ours. But you know, the specialty finance companies, they don't have the time or the resources to train and to basically grow a cybersecurity department, right? And then what happens when they grow them and then they move somewhere else because they get higher pay or something like that, right? So find somebody that you can trust and let them take all the liability, transfer that risk over to them, and let them help guide you as far as what cybersecurity should have, and as a partnership.
Yeah.
But do test your staff. Test and test and test your staff.
Always.
That's, that's critical.
Because they're going to be the ones that are going to be targeted. So, that's so important, making sure that they are up to date and have that expectation that they have to question once they receive an attachment. Well, is this a test? Is this real? Should I report it? So I love that. We do those often. I think at least once a quarter we send them out. In fact, they fooled me. I haven't clicked an attachment, but I've forwarded to members in our organization saying, "Hey, why'd you send me this?" So always being a little bit curious, asking that extra question to making sure it's legit.
Because one of the concerns is that you have different weights for how important certain security controls are, right? So how important is making sure your phishing is addressed? And it just gets exponentially larger if you don't have other controls in place as well. One of the bigger things for specialty finance companies, because they're smaller, is they don't have segmentation of their network to reduce in case somebody gets into one part of the network, they won't get to all parts of the network, right? Let's talk about the casino that went down 6 months ago.
Oh, yep.
Right? How did they get in there? They got in through a fish tank, but it wasn't segmented off from their other network.
So wild, yeah.
Right? So you don't think about the TVs that are over here or anything like that. They got through a fish tank, and then they were able to get to the network, put ransomware, and hold them hostage for a week and a half.
And there was another, I believe it was Target, a handful of years ago, it was through a thermostat. Correct. Or like a smart thermostat. So it's just the way it's evolving. It's, it's scary, but organizations like yourselves really help us stay protected and stay one step ahead. The importance of having groups like yours to help train the staff and place those measures in place, it definitely goes appreciated, and it should be very important, and it should be something that groups prioritize, especially in today's day and age where we're seeing an increase in attacks and attempts. I can't stress the importance of it, which is a big reason why I wanted to have this discussion. George.
Let me add one more thing real quickly that we've, some of the things have become obsolete pretty quick. So we originally, when we had a client that said they wanted to change their bank account that we would send money to, we would get to the owner and ask for the last 4 digits Social Security. Right. That's old stuff now. Every crook has the last 4 digits of your Social Security number, probably. It's just amazing. And so we've now, because we work with Clear to run our background reports, so now we have a plug-in to where the Clear, they'll give them 3 questions from their background, which is, what was your address when your first child was born, kind of thing.
Right.
And that's been very effective at making sure we have the right authorized person when they're, changing a bank account information, which is the hardest thing that a specialty finance company has to face is changing bank account information. It's scariest part of the deal.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Well, George, I can't thank you enough for joining us, sharing your knowledge, your firsthand experience in something that our viewers and listeners can directly relate to. I'm sure they've experienced similar things. And Sanjay, coming from someone that does this every single day, seeing all different types of attacks and what to be on the lookout for. I really appreciate you sharing with our viewers and listeners how they can improve their systems, the importance of cybersecurity, and why it should be prioritized. So for our viewers and listeners, how could they find you if they have any questions or wanted to look at an organization like yours?
Reach us on the internet, www.cyberonesecurity.com, or you can call me directly. I'll give out my phone number, 817-228-8318. Happy to answer any questions that they have. I mean, we just barely touched on cybersecurity over here and just kind of whet our appetite. I mean, there's so much more that we can go into from that standpoint to help protect an organization and the processes that they should have within their organization. So, yeah, give me a call.
Thank you for that plug and letting everyone know how to reach you. And for all of our viewers and listeners, I really appreciate you joining us. Remember to stay informed, stay inspired, and stay on course to growing your financial platform. Till next time.